Hey, there we go.
Howdy. Still can't.
Howdy. All right. Sound check. I hear you well. How are you?
Good. I still can't see you though.
Oh, here we go. Now you see me. How you
Cool.
doing?
How you doing, brother?
All right. Sorry for the delay. Here we are live.
Ready to rock?
Yeah, ready to rock.
All right.
Time got a little bit busy with work this morning and kind of calls and stuff went a little bit long,
I.
but here we are.
All right. Cool. I'm admitting everyone in. Lights, camera, action. Here we
Here
go.
we
We are
go.
live for the Biohack with Light webinar with my friend Matt. Gonna geek out about light. I'm super excited.
Likewise.
Are you in Costa Rica? Where are you?
I'm in San Diego now. Yeah, Encinitas, California.
Cool. I know you travel around the map quite a bit. So
I have been recently quite on the road a lot.
cool. So people are continuing to join, which is great. We just got a new puppy on Saturday. She's so cute, but she's taking a nap in the other room. So hopefully this doesn't wake her up. But if you hear barking in the background, it's
That's all right.
a cute puppy just waking up from her nap.
Good
But
with
we have
me.
like an hour together. It could go longer, it could go shorter. And people that are just joining, please, I think we have a chat. Yeah, we do have a
Looks
chat.
like
So
we do.
please ask questions, comment. We'd love to hear, where people are tuning in from. So if you want to use the chat, we'll answer any questions.
Perfect. Perfect.
Cool. So why don't you just start, Matt, by introducing yourself and telling everyone how you know so much about light.
So my name's Matt. I'm from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania originally. And basically when I was younger, I had a series of events that led me to start researching health. I just wanted to understand how my body worked at a deeper level so that I might be able to not have these issues I was having, which were like gut issues, allergies, headaches, just classic sort of low grade chronic health issues. Thankfully, nothing severe, but nonetheless, nuisance and really disruptive to like enjoyment of life as a middle schooler and elementary schooler and high schooler. So I started researching and I came across this world of like the paleo diet and this concept of ancestral alternative eating and being more connected with nature, and especially the concept of epigenetics, that we could modify the activity of our genes and cells through environmental inputs as opposed to everything being internally directed by a genetic blueprint. And that fascinated me a lot. At the time, the things I was reading were basically saying that the main way that we can influence our epigenetics is through our diet. That the diet is really the most important thing. Our nutrition, our diet, our exercise, our supplementation was the main thing we could do to influence and modulate our epigenetics. And I went all in on this concept. And basically, I struggled a lot still, even though I went super strict on my diets and tried all these supplements of all kinds, alternative, super nutrient dense, healthy. But I was still struggling. I was still, knew there was room for improvement. And at some point along the way, I came across something that sort of sparked a light bulb. And basically, that was that our cells are these sort of energetic systems that are far more complex than just the fuel that's going into them. The fuel that goes into our cells is our food, and then we sort of have, if you think of a car, we have like almost like fuel additives, like supplements and nutrition, things that can improve the engine and improve the function. But nonetheless, beyond the food and the fuel, there's still an entire engine with all of its intricacies, which is far more complex than just the fuel that's going inside of it. And our cells are like that, and far more complex than even the most fancy car engine. And there are other factors that affect the function of the engine beyond the fuel that's going into them, namely bioenergetics. So basically, the way that energy flows through organisms and environments and cells. And that basically I started to learn that we've been going through this transition over the last couple hundred years to a more and more disconnected environment from the environment in which we evolved to become humans with the large human brain. And so this disconnect of ourselves from that original environment is causing our cells to not work energetically the way that they were designed. And we're seeing all sorts of declines in our body as a result. And so one of the main things that affects the energetics of our cells is light, because we evolved originally as light-based organisms and energy-based organisms before we were, consuming lots of food, in many respects. And all food at its core has energy that we can utilize because it's energized by light energy from the sun. And so I thought it was fascinating. Wow, there's this whole other world that goes even deeper than our food. And I went deep. I learned a lot, and it really helped me. And I think I know it's sort of the future of medicine, the future of health. It's where all the biohacking and everything is trending, is towards light and energy. So I feel very blessed to have been able to sort of learn about it early on in the curve.
And you mostly focus on glasses, right? And mostly blue light blocking glasses. And I'm curious about that because there's so many biohacking tools and tips and tricks that people can use with light that we'll go over. But your kind of bread and butter is the glasses, which surprisingly not a lot of people know about. In the biohacking scene, it is, everyone seems to know about it, but the average public, it is a new kind of phenomenon that makes a lot of sense. So why don't you just talk about what are blue light blocking glasses? Why should people wear them? What are they about?
Yeah, it's a good point you bring up. It's really interesting how they are not known about at all. Like green juices, things like this, even mushroom powder, if you can imagine, like even mushroom powder is becoming more well known about, like, because of companies like yours and the others out there that have been doing this. It's amazing. People are like, oh, nutritious food, nutrient dense supplements. I get that. People just get it, even in the mainstream. Like, okay, well, I might not use that because that's some hippie stuff, but from a mainstream perspective, maybe. But at least I know what it is. It's something that's nutrient dense. It's good for my body. But even just the concept of like anything related to light is so far from the public awareness and general awareness. It's a great point you bring up. So I would say, my bread and butter is more than anything, it's just educating about, or trying to educate and learn more myself about light and its relevance. But as far as, what my main business is right now, it is selling the glasses. And the reason for that is because, and I'll explain what they are, but basically of all the things that we could do to improve our health using light, when I started to learn about it, there was one thing that was the lowest hanging fruit, the easiest and simplest thing that we could apply. And that is using blue light blocking glasses. That's the general term they're used, is blue light glasses or blue light blocking glasses, used to describe these glasses. And the reason for this is, so one of the really important effects of light on our body, which we'll get into several of them, but is that light controls our body's circadian rhythm, which is the timing system that basically controls the timing of everything in our engines. So example number one of how our environment could be, in many respects, it could supersede the importance of the fuel that's going in certain contexts. And so one would be, for example, if the timing systems that control our cellular engines and the mechanics of our cells are thrown off for some reason, then all of the things that need to get where they need to go, all of the reactions that need to occur in certain circumstances throughout the day, all of these are thrown off. And this simple disconnect fundamentally throws off the function of the entire cell and organism as a result. And that's just as simple as what's called circadian disruption, because we have these circadian rhythms, which are basically, circa means approximately and dies means a day in Latin. So this rhythm they found in humans and in most living organisms, basically all living organisms, contain these rhythms that are a biological cycle that's approximately one day, meaning circa dies, approximately a day. So circadian. And that's because they observed in the labs that these rhythms of cycles of hormone secretions and neurotransmitter secretions and all sorts of other metabolic activities they followed about the length of a day, which leads the I'd say inquisitive mind to wonder why these rhythms in our body follow the length of a day, and the answer becomes pretty obvious. It's so intuitive. It's because the most profound change in our environment on a regular basis is the shift of day to night, aka one full day. And so our bodies and all other organisms have systems to track this change. And a good question would be, well, why? Why do we have systems to track this change? I mean, again, it's almost seems intuitive and obvious. Well, because we have to sleep and we have to wake, and it's just how it is. And it's like, well, why is it that way? Why is it that we have to be asleep, and why is it that we have to be awake at certain times? And with further inquiry, we could understand that, based on the evidence and the evolutionary evidence, well, life's primordial state is probably more what we would consider sleeping in many respects, because bacteria, archaea, they're active and they have periods maybe of more activity and less activity, but we wouldn't consider them to have a state of wakefulness in the same way that we do as humans, or that other animals might, or even plants. And so, sleep is this time when the sun's no longer present, the sun is not out, Earth is, in its own shadow. Basically, the surface of the earth is in its own shadow away from the sun. And this is a time when life typically is repairing its cells. The Earth's magnetic field is stronger. This is really good for cellular repair. And everything is, and there are nocturnal animals that have found a niche where they're able to basically stay awake all night and rest during the day. As a result, nocturnal animals typically lack complexity. Not always, but they're typically less complex than diurnal animals, because diurnal animals have the ability to utilize sunlight energy, which enhances basically it's a source of energy that can be utilized to drive complexity. And so we are diurnal, which means that we have a niche in the evolutionary world where we utilize sunlight energy during the day, and sunlight energy powers a ton of our reactions. And so the reason for circadian rhythms, then, basically, whether you're diurnal or nocturnal, is to be able to know what time of day it is, to be able to carry out the reactions that match with that time of day. And so for humans, when we're awake, when the sun comes out, our body secretes things like cortisol, which basically wakes us up. It's also does certain things to protect us from the sun. And we make serotonin. We begin to have bowel movements early in the morning to clear out our bowels. Our metabolism is more active. We go out and hunt for nutrients. We can utilize those nutrients. When the night comes, we make melatonin so that we can repair our cells. And basically, melatonin scavenges the damage from the metabolic activity during the day, which is inherently damaging to cells. It causes, because of the process of basically oxidative phosphorylation, which is how we make energy, we create all sorts of things like free radicals that can be damaging. So melatonin scavenges that, we repair, and so on. So all that's to say that that's an important process, all of that stuff. And what we've done in the modern world is we've introduced artificial light, which allows us to extend, especially in the beginning, the invention of artificial light allowed humans to extend our working hours beyond what they were, because it gives us a stimulus through the eye that allows us to stay awake. Because when it gets dark and all you're using is candlelight, it's really easy to fall asleep. So electric or artificial lighting was a great innovation in this respect. But what we didn't know is that, at least what people didn't know at the time, is that when you stimulate the body, the brain, artificially with artificial lighting to stay awake longer, you're sort of burning the candle at both ends, in the sense that, sure, you can trick the brain to stay awake longer, but what's the cost of that? The cost of that is that still requires energy, and that's basically energy that we're taking off of the next day or the tail end of our life. The key reason is because you can eat food to power that, but what we ultimately need for our metabolism to run with full efficiency and function is solar energy, so sunlight, essentially. So staying up late under the guise of tricky artificial light appears to be fine, because, okay, you can eat food to stay awake longer, have energy, but if you don't have the solar energy, the infrared light, particularly from the sun, then it's creating a lot of oxidative damage in our cells. And this is why this whole world of everyone staying up super late into the evening now, because of artificial light, has allowed us to do this, our whole society has shifted our circadian rhythms late into the evening. Sun goes down, we turn on all the lights, we're on our screens, we're doing all this stuff. And now we're all sleeping in, not all of us, but many people are sleeping in to 7, 8, 9 a.m. as if this is normal. Like normally humans wake up around 3, 4, 5 a.m., before the sun comes up, typically, just biologically. So what the glasses do is they simply block the blue light stimulus from any light source at night that's disrupting our circadian rhythm. And that really has a huge impact, allowing our brain to know when it's night, to make more melatonin. So long answer to put it more simply is the glasses are the bread and butter right now, because they're the simplest way to have the biggest impact on people's health that isn't free. And the free one, which is the real big one, is just going outside more and getting in the sun. So that's the core. Oh, you're muted.
Thanks. I've seen all different colors of these glasses. I've seen them, red tinted. I've seen them, clear with like a little blue tint. Are there differences? I'm guessing because you've been in the industry for so long.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's knockoffs. There's ones that don't perform as well, or ones that have different functions. So for people kind of inspired, and that was a really cool explanation, and I'm sure, I mean, it's so obvious, but a lot of people don't think about it, right? So many people in our modern society are so disconnected from the natural world, which is part of the problem. And so, what are the different options out there for people?
Yeah, so I was going to mention, so we have the main product that I was just referring to. We used to call it our night lenses because they're blue light glasses or blue light blocking glasses that would be used at night to protect our sleep and our circadian rhythm. But ultimately, I've renamed them to sleep lenses because effectively the main job that they accomplish for people is better sleep. So we also have lenses formerly called day lenses, again, a little bit confusing without a lot of background knowledge. Now we call them screen lenses. So during the day, you can actually use screen lenses to protect your eyes from excess blue light from screens, and especially because there are softwares we can download on our screens, which I actually have on my screen right now, called Iris. Iris is a great software from a Bulgarian guy. The thing that the screen lenses are actually most useful for is fluorescent and LED lighting in office buildings and workspaces that cannot be modified, or if you are behind windows. So like, for example, the reason I don't have screen lenses on right now, just for the inquisitive mind here, is one, because I have a software on my screen that blocks basically all the blue, so I don't really need it. But more importantly is because I have a big screen door right behind. I don't know if you hear helicopters and stuff flying over, hopefully not, but there's a screen door that's open. So I'm getting the full spectrum of sunlight passing through this screen door, including infrared, which is the key. And that is basically outweighs the effects of blue light from screens. In other words, the sun has tons of this blue light, which I was describing. It can be harmful if we have it at night because it disrupts our body's rhythm. The blue specifically for reasons we could get into later. But basically the blue wavelengths within the sun, which is the full colors from red to violet and infrared and ultraviolet. So anyway, that's why I don't have screen lenses on. But what's really interesting for people to know about the glasses and about screen lenses and sleep lenses, I'll start with sleep lenses, is that, recently I've been doing market research. I've been really trying to figure out, how can I explain this to people in a way that people can really just get what it is we're doing, right? So I started looking through this lens of like, what is it that our products actually accomplish that I was using them for in the beginning? And I'm a unique customer because I was coming from this biohacker world, but what are our existing customers who are purchasing the glasses? What are they using it for? My own biases aside. And so I put out some polls and started asking for it and, answers from people to understand what people are really looking for, because it's easy to think that, we have this experience and we find the solution and we get obsessed with how great the solution is and might lose sight. And I sure did for a period of like what it is that the customer really is going for. Right. And so this could be valuable for you, this kind of thinking. You're probably already doing it. But so basically I asked, what are the things that the sleep lenses are truly doing at the core? So there's three main functions. One is to help people relax more easily. Two is to sleep better. And three is to have more energy, which is the result of natural relaxation in the evening and better sleep, is having more energy when you wake up and sustain throughout the day. And so, what got really interesting was when I started asking, okay, this is what our glasses do. And the science is sort of what I was describing. The lenses have these pigments, which are the pigments that are red. And so I'll work an answer to your question into this explanation, but the lenses of these are red because we have found the right balance of wavelengths to block and to transmit. Basically, the ideal night glasses in theory could be a blindfold because you don't really want any light. The more darkness you can have at night, the better, right? But as far as functionality goes, we know that you still need to see some light in order to function in the evening. And it happens to be the case, thankfully, that the wavelengths that affect our circadian rhythm the most are the blue wavelengths. There's some effect from green, but once you get into yellow, orange, and red, the colors of fire, the warmer wavelengths, these have much less effect on our circadian rhythm. Bright amounts of red light even can affect the circadian rhythm, but a lot less than blue. You'd need like hundreds of times the brightness to have the same effect. And that's because the cells in the retina are particularly sensitive to blue light, likely because the blue color in the sun is the one that is scattered the most by atmosphere. And therefore, as the sun's position in the sky plane changes throughout the day, the blue light wavelengths have the most profound shift. So it's a very good color for the brain to be able to use for timing. And this is the same reason the sky is blue, is because, digression here, the sky is blue because, and I didn't know this for the longest time. It took me a lot of research on light to understand it. But basically, the light from the sun is white, like star. It's just like a starlight. And so that means it's composed of red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet, and other colors as well that are filtered out through the atmosphere. Now, when these wavelengths, these colors are passing through the atmosphere, I think of them like a pack of wolves. So basically, the wolves that are running the slowest can sort of bob and weave around the air molecules or around trees in a forest, let's say. And the wolves that are running fastest through a forest could maybe run into a tree because they're going so fast they might not be able to bob and weave, right? And so in the same way, the colors coming from the sun through the atmosphere, it's a concept called Rayleigh scattering. The wavelengths that are going the fastest, which is the blue and the violet, are more inclined to be scattered because they bump into and bounce off of the air molecules, whereas the ones that are going just a little bit slower, the red and infrared and orange and yellow, are less scattered. And therefore, so the blue being the largest component of colors coming to the sun, and actually violet's also significant, but because of the way our photoreceptors in our eye work, even though the sky is half blue, half violet, we see it more as blue. And so the blue and the violet are scattered, making the sky appear blue. And then the remaining colors that come through have less blue, which is why the sun appears more yellowish than actually a true white, which it actually is like any other star. So it's a fun fact of why the sky is blue. But so our brain we have these receptors in our eye on a more practical level here from research they've done that are, when you stimulate the eye with a light, they basically, respond, they contract and are activated. Specific receptors beyond our visual receptors, beyond the rods and cones. They're called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells. It's the third type of photoreceptor that was recently discovered in the last 30 years. Really, really important stuff. It's important because it doesn't create images in our brain like the rods and the cones do. It's purely for controlling our circadian rhythms and timing. So basically, these sleep lenses, you wear them at night in when there's any lights around that isn't fire or a red light, for example, which is something we're working on developing, is healthier lighting at night for people. So that'll be another thing besides the glasses. But so that allows the brain to chill out and relax. Or again, you could just use candles. So the brain chills, so you have natural evening relaxation. You sleep better because the brain makes more melatonin. And then because the brain's made more melatonin, you've gone to sleep earlier, you slept more deeply with the melatonin, scavenging the free radicals and healing the cells. Now people wake up the next day and they have more energy. Another thing to note is it's really important to not eat big, heavy meals late in the afternoon or in the evening, because this also disrupts our circadian rhythm. So the ideal light diet, which is the protocol I teach about, is one where we're eating the majority of our calories, our biggest meal, late morning, early afternoon, midday approximately. And then any food we have in the late afternoon or evening is very light, typically is and the later you go, the lighter it has to be, or none is better after like 5 or 6 p.m., depending on when the sun sets. Earlier if the sun sets earlier, later if the sun sets later. But so that's what we're doing. Now, what was really interesting was when I started saying, so what are the things people are currently using to try to solve these problems as a result of this modern lifestyle? Like, what are the crutches people are leaning on? Because people will always try to solve things, or they'll just throw their hands up and just accept a poor quality of life. And For relaxing in the evening, we have basically what I would consider, I mean, people have always drinking alcohol, but this is like, we have a thing where it's super normal. People need their 2 glasses of wine just to chill out, or they need to smoke, which is fine, like weed or things like this, but people need it. That's when it becomes an issue, is not when it's just fun and recreational, but when people have to do this and they can't sleep otherwise. Or people are taking Ambien or Valium. These are what people are using to attempt to solve a problem that's a relatively new problem. And that's what our simple biological hacks or strategies can solve. For people to sleep better, it's the same thing. People are using all of those same crutches, right? Melatonin pills, Valium, Ambien, weed, and so on. And then for more energy during the day, everyone knows we're using coffee. And like, that's something that, I don't personally, I was never a big user of these types of things, although there's a period when I needed, cannabis and things just to really relax. But since using the sun and healthy circadian rhythm function, I haven't had these issues, and it's been amazing. And I've seen my health increase alongside that. So that's a sort of a different answer to what you're asking, but I think it's important. So the night lenses that we have, or now sleep lenses, are red. And the reason why is they block all the wavelengths that need to be blocked at night, namely the blue and the green. The screen lenses we have, which are a deep yellow, the reason they're that color as opposed to a more orange or red is because we found the balance that we still want to block the vast majority of blue light during the day, which is what lends the lens to become yellow, but we're not blocking into the green range, which is why the lens isn't as red as the sleep lenses. And then to answer your question about clear lenses with the blue flashy coating, these are really interesting. These effectively, I've tested dozens of brands now because I buy them and test them. They basically don't block any significant portion of blue light. And so it's going to sound interesting because the majority of purchased blue light glasses today, probably 90 to 95%, are clear lenses with a little flashy blue coating, which is like an anti-reflective coating. And the reason these are the most purchased is because in following with sort of more innovative companies like Raw Optics and some of the other ones in the biohacking world, more and more mainstream companies have decided to offer blue light coatings, whether they're local opticians or Warby Parker or iBuyDirect or Zenni Optical, any of the large online glasses giants, prescription online glasses giants. They all say $20 extra, $30 extra, $10 extra, add this blue light coating. So that's what they're doing. And so blue light is one of the most dominant colors in the color spectrum. The color spectrum goes from about 400 nanometers to about 750-ish. And so that's from blue all the way to red. That's the visible spectrum. And below that is ultraviolet, and above 750 is infrared, which we can't see, but they're still reaching the earth in large proportions. Anything beyond that, on the one hand, radio waves and stuff, all of which are generated by the sun, those are filtered by the atmosphere. And then X-rays, gamma rays, and all that stuff, that radiation is also filtered by the atmosphere. So the sun makes it, but it doesn't reach us. So we're concerned with, for life, infrared to ultraviolet. Now, because blue goes all the way from about 500, or I should say 400 to 500 nanometers, there's a lot of wavelengths that our brain perceives as blue. And this is the key. The ones that the brain is most sensitive to for circadian rhythm effects and basically controlling our hormones and our metabolism and all these things that occur through the eye affecting the circadian rhythm, this is about 479 nanometers approximately. And it goes in each direction, but peak sensitivity is about 479 nanometers. Now, our screen devices and LEDs that are the main form of lighting that's used today to provide lighting indoors for people to be able to see is LED lighting that's based on blue light, which is 455 nanometers. So we're talking about a 24 nanometer difference from the main spike of blue light from screens and LEDs and the most sensitive, area, or basically what our eyes are most sensitive to. It's very close. In fact, they almost overlap perfectly. Now, the sun emits blue light from 400, 500 nanometers. So these blue light glasses that are on the market today, they block 100% of blue light from 400 up to 420 nanometers. By the time they get to 455 nanometers, they block almost nothing, which means they're blocking blue light. They're blocking a significant portion, but of an insignificant range of blue light. Because if the screens aren't emitting anything at 420 nanometers, in that range, they're only really emitting past 430, and especially the peak is at 455, so down to 430 and up to about 480, which is where our eyes are most sensitive. Then these blue light screen glasses they're selling are literally irrelevant. And to call them screen glasses is insulting to people's intelligence because they don't block anything that screens are emitting. It's beyond absurd. So this is kind of like my passion. I want to expose what's happening and how people are sort of being deceived a little bit. And there's something to be said for placebos. But anyhow, that's why any clear blue light glasses are completely worthless, like fully worthless. And they have to have at least a little yellow tinge to be doing anything. But even then, there's companies that have a slight yellow tinge. One to name is Felix Gray, and they're playing off of the complete inadequacy of the complete clear lenses and saying our lenses block 15 times or 20 times more than the other ones. But when it's 15 times 1%, it's really, or 2%, it's really insignificant. Like they're blocking 30% of 455 nanometers. We're blocking 95+%, So it's really a very interesting discussion. And so I think people need to know this. And I'm glad you asked this question pointed right in the beginning, because no one really likes to get into this detail. So it's really cool.
Yeah, you seem to be the right person to ask, and I'm equally as passionate about mushroom stuff. And I'm curious though, because I was doing research before this on all these different types of light therapy, and there's all these people, kind of ganging up on blue light, saying it's so bad, and as you were explaining, it's just at a certain time of day, right? At night, you don't want much blue light or none at all, right? But there is something called blue light therapy. And I don't know if you want to talk about that, of the complete opposite spectrum of actually utilizing blue light for, therapeutic uses. And there's even white light, right? I used a happy lamp for a while, and that was super helpful in the winter when I wasn't getting enough sunlight in the Northeast. And, it was filled with snow outside, and I was working indoors. So I worked by a happy lamp. I don't know how effective it was, but when I closed my eyes, it felt like I was looking at the sun. So, maybe it was all placebo, but placebo works. But, I'm just curious if you wanted to talk about these other, therapeutic uses of blue and white light.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to get into that. So I would add to your point about blue light. It can be bad or disruptive, really, because bad is subjective, but disruptive can be objective. So it can be disruptive to our biology at night. But the other time it can be disruptive, which is why we make screen lenses, is when it's uncoupled or separate from the full spectrum of sunlight. So if you look at a graph of full spectrum sunlight, in fact, maybe we're on Zoom. I was thinking maybe I could even share my screen real quick. Spectral distribution of different light sources here. I'll pull something up and see. Maybe you can grant me share access. This is super useful for people to see. Here we go. Got it. All right, let's give this a shot here. So I have this spectral power distribution of different light sources right here, this image. So basically, I'll just zoom in on this. So you can you see this well? All right, cool. So basically, this is daylight. And keep in mind, I think you might be muted, Alex, just so you know. But so this is daylight. This is incandescent. This is fluorescent, obviously halogen, cool white LED, and warm white LED. So daylight is a totally full spectrum from this. This is what this is called, full spectrum. So it's a continuous spectrum because of the way that the light is generated by the reactions occurring in the sun. And it's even cut off here, but it goes into the ultraviolet below 400 nanometers and so on. And it goes well into the infrared range beyond, up to 1500, 2000 nanometers. So then incandescent is also more of a full spectrum light source, although not totally, because it's very deficient in the blues, deficient in violet, and so on. It does have a lot more red and infrared, which is actually good. And incandescent is one of the better light sources that are available today, as well as halogen. Again, it depends on the type of bulb and the flicker that's occurring because they're plugged into the electric power grid. So light bulbs, when you plug them in, they flicker because of the electric power grid that's running on alternating current. And so this can be very stressful and disruptive to the brain, especially flickering blue wavelengths because of the way they affect and stimulates certain processes, but as can the rest of the colors. Fluorescent is horribly not full spectrum, as you can see here. Fluorescence produced by electrifying mercury vapor in a tube. So what's also fascinating is, just a side note, but when it's something like, I believe the theory is called like molecular resonance theory or something, and this is a big theory of a German light researcher named Dr. Wunsch in Europe. And basically, every atom has certain wavelengths of light that it absorbs and re-emits. It's just the physical properties of that atom. And so when we put mercury into a lamp and electrify it, it causes the mercury to absorb that energy and re-emit certain light wavelengths. Well, those wavelengths that mercury is absorbing and re-emitting in particular are the same wavelengths that, if someone has mercury toxicity, are going to be absorbed and activating the mercury in a person's body, because it's the resonant frequency. And so people with mercury toxicity can have really, really big problems under fluorescent lighting, because it's emitting the light wavelengths that specifically activate the mercury, and it could potentially cause, again, to become active in that person's cells and become highly problematic. So huge issue with fluorescence. And then LEDs have a whole host of issues with flicker as well, but especially cool white LEDs, which is the basis of our modern devices. You can see there's a massive amount of blue light, a ridiculous amount of blue light, which is very stimulating and also highly addictive if you're staring at a screen all the time. And there's no ultraviolet, and there's virtually no infrared. So the other context in which blue light can be disruptive and damaging to the body, based on my research, and I would say based on the research that's available, is when there's blue light lacking in infrared. Because as you can see in the full spectrum of daylight, when we have blue light in the sun, it can be very beneficial. So this would be like a blue light therapy I would say I approve of. The more stimulatory, potentially oxidative effects of blue light, ultraviolet, violet light, which still also have certain benefits, but these sort of, because they're higher energy frequencies, this is what can cause us to sunburn or have aging and sort of issues. So again, there are benefits, like we make vitamin D from ultraviolet light. We use ultraviolet light to release nitric oxide in our cells, which causes our blood to flow more freely. And it stimulates the eye and the brain to make things like serotonin and dopamine. So there are benefits to these higher energy wavelengths. They have huge benefits, but they also come with these certain costs and certain negative effects. But the cool thing about the red and the infrared wavelengths in particular is that they're very, very healing. And so they sort of balance out, in a way, the higher energy wavelengths of light in a really great way. And with a cool white LED, basically what we're doing is as the original light bulbs were sort of made to do unintentionally at night, we're stimulating the brain and the nervous system to stay awake and be active with this big spike of blue light, which is why it's such an effective. The reason they use so much blue is because it's very bright, and it doesn't require a ton of energy to make a lot of brightness. And so you can get really high irradiance or lumens or lux in a room with a cool white LED with very low energy. So these are eco-friendly light sources. And the issue with this is that they're not actually eco-friendly. And this is sort of like my theory here, that basically the amount of healthcare costs we're going to be paying for sick humans who are basically mal-illuminated. Mal-illumination is a condition when we lack basically full spectrum sunlight. The amount of costs and energy we are already paying and are going to continue to pay more of. I mean, not to mention that the pandemic, which could arguably highly be linked to vitamin D deficiency and sunlight deficiency across the board. But so, I mean, the costs economically of that and environmentally and so on can be argued to be quite significant. But in certain ways, yes, no, I don't like to get too political, but basically this blue light without infrared becomes very, very damaging. And not to mention the flicker effect of these LEDs. So that is a little explanation of the light spectrums. So back to the question about blue light therapy.
And even red light therapy as well,
yeah.
Because as you're explaining before, maybe the spectrums on the redder scale are a little more easeful for the body, and maybe we already get way too much blue light. And the other end of the spectrum. So I know a lot of biohackers like Ben Greenfield, and could list a dozen others that swear by red light therapy as well. it seems
Yeah.
like you're maybe leaning towards that, and then just going outside and getting pure sunlight.
Exactly.
You know what I
That's
mean?
what I was getting at. And you really took the words out of my mouth. We get so much blue light now from not healthy sources or imbalanced, not full spectrum sources. So basically, I would say blue light therapy is not something I would recommend for most people. Again, there are experts who specialize in color therapy, and they will use blue light. They'll use green light. They'll have people wear colored lenses out in the sun. This is not my particular specialty, although it's something I'm studying and learning more and more about, specific color therapy or chromotherapy. This guy, Dr. Wunsch in Germany, is a great expert in this, and there are several others. There's a guy named Dr. Jacob Lieberman, who has written some amazing books about light. In fact, if I can recommend those to people, one would be called Take Off Your Glasses and See. Another, he helped people heal poor vision using light therapy and also emotional therapy, like helping unwind traumas, and people's vision would come back. Really, really fascinating. Another one he has is called Light Medicine of the Future. Really amazing book, very comprehensive. And another book is called Luminous Life, which goes into more spiritual matters relating to light. Just while we're on the subject, there's some other really good books about light that people can read. One's called Health and Light by a guy named John Ott, who was Walt Disney's time-lapse photographer. So he used light to make plants dance for a Walt Disney movie long ago. And basically, he would use light to cause the plants to turn from left to right over periods of time and use time-lapse images, and then moisture content in the air to cause the plants to wilt and stand up and wilt and stand up, so he could make the flowers dance over a couple of days up and down and side to side with the light. And so he learned by using so much light on these plants that light, if the light was kept on certain plants all night long, it would affect like the morning glories opening in the morning naturally. And then he started studying animals, and eventually he studied humans when it was possible, without all the regulatory stuff. Like they did some analysis of children in a school with all the windows closed and fluorescent lights on versus windows open and fluorescent lights off. And the kids in the fluorescent light group were basically significantly more hyperactive, and so on and so forth. So these are things now it's normal for kids to be hyperactive. I mean, probably by past standards, I would be hyperactive, and so would most kids of our modern generation, just because of, we can't sit still. We are on our phones all the time. So this is a great book, Health and Light, by this guy, John Ott. And then there's another really cool one by a guy who was an architect named Richard Hobday. And this is called The Healing Sun. And these are all fascinating books that just explain so many different observations from so many different angles about how light has been so impactful for health for thousands of years, and current recent observations and studies, and just fascinating stuff. One more that's really scientific is called Light Shaping Life, Biophotons in Biology and Medicine, which goes down to a really deep level of how our cells absorb and emit basically specifically ultraviolet light, which is what is claimed to be the cause of skin cancer and so on, when in reality, like it's not. It could be in excess doses, but it's not the cause of skin cancer. And the cause is multifactorial, with all the toxins that we're exposed to today, circadian rhythm disruption, poor diet that alters our body's ability to utilize sunlight energy. Also, people migrating from places with less sun to a lot more sun, and burning and practicing unsafe sun exposure, and sunscreen and sunglasses would be two big causes, or at least contributing factors, because of the toxic chemicals in sunscreen, which have started to be broken out in all these news articles recently. I don't know if you've seen, but they're recalling Neutrogena sunscreen because of benzene, which is in this, which they finally realized is carcinogenic after the alternative health world talking about it for decades, and all these other chemicals. So it's fascinating stuff. Sunglasses are damaging to our body's ability to utilize sunlight, because the eye, like we've been talking about, is the master sensor for basically at least light information from the environment, visible light, and ultraviolet and infrared as well, which are invisible light. The third eye, or the first eye, the pineal gland, is sort of the master sensor for frequencies and wavelengths of energy beyond the traditional light spectrum. But that's a different conversation, which is also very relevant here. But basically, so the eye being the master sensor in light, let's see, there's another book actually. So I love recommending these, because those who are fascinated listening to this can go back and write all this stuff down. Another book is called The Influence of Ocular Light Perception on Metabolism in Man and an Animal, And this one, basically, this German researcher explains how light affects basically every single system in the body. And this is from like the 60s. Every single organ system in the body, the production of the metabolites and hormones and everything is massively affected by just the transmission of light going through the eye. In other words, patients who had cataracts, which impede the transition of light through the eye, like blind people in particular, have often very altered hormones and stuff. And when they would take out the cataracts, the craziest thing is these certain values in the body would start to normalize. So basically, we have a chat request to write down the name of the book. This one's we will.
Yeah, we are recording this. We will have the recording available, so you can go back and listen to the books. And also, if you want to write down the list, we can have it. We can send out an email to everyone joining us today with all the book recommendations, and we'll post it on our YouTube with show notes. So
easy. Yeah, it's perfect. So one of the things he noticed that was really interesting is these frogs that were or some type of reptile or amphibian was basically, it would change its color based on the environment it was in. But what was interesting is they could put it so that the entire animal was on a black background. And so you would assume maybe it would be changed black. But if what the eyes were exposed to was white, the whole thing would be white. So it was all about light coming in the eyes. And in a similar way, the light passing through our eyes stimulates something called alpha melanocyte stimulating hormones, the production of this through the brain. And alpha melanocyte stimulating hormone is what it sounds like. It stimulates the production of melanocytes, which make melanin, cells in our skin that make melanin, which protects us from ultraviolet light and this high energy radiation. So like I said, there's benefits to ultraviolet and high energy violet and blue, but also too much causes damage. And so that's why we have melanin. And people obviously in equatorial places have a lot more melanin for this reason. People who went to the northern places, at least Northern Europe, some gained this tremendously beneficial adaptation of basically less melanin, which is beneficial when you have less light because you can make more vitamin D and get more general light through the body. But then there's the converse. If you go somewhere with super bright light or that's super hot, then because of other factors as well, you can overheat much more easily. Like I would hardly stand a chance, especially from a survival perspective, against an African person in Africa. I would overheat in a minute, and they could stay out in the sun and hunt and stuff, and I'd be dead. So whereas conversely, they might freeze in the tundra, so we all have adaptations based on where we're from, or our ancestors are from, which is super cool and very valuable. And so, just by wearing sunglasses that block ultraviolet B light, which is what they all do, the ones that are UVA, UVB protected, they should write skin cancer, cause skin cancer, because you block the production of natural protective melanin. So they're saying they're protecting the eyes from cataracts and all these other things, which is sort of nonsense based on research. Again, if you get too much light, it's a problem, but reasonable, healthy light exposure we need. And so back to red light, blue light therapy. I don't recommend blue light therapy. I wouldn't do it. Unless it's coupled with a lot of red and infrared in the full spectrum, aka just go out in the sun. But red light therapy, there's a lot of evidence that not only does it not have harmful, toxic doses and disruptive effects like blue light, it actually has huge benefits. There's these proteins in our cells, and especially in the mitochondria, that specifically absorb red light, and it helps to optimize these energy production systems we've been speaking about. So that's something we're actually going to be releasing in probably a couple of weeks, maybe a month to 2 months, I'd say at the most, red light therapy devices. And so we've developed red light therapy devices that are extremely low in flicker, about as low as you can make them, so they don't have that issue of the flicker. They have strong irradiance, and they're specifically targeted on the wavelengths that are the most healing, the red and the infrared. So these are really cool, and you can use these. There's other devices that are really cool as well. A friend of mine makes a device called Sauna Space. And actually, I'm going to be an affiliate with them. So if anyone wants to get Sauna Space, use my code, The Light Diet, and you'll be hooked up. And so basically, they have more full spectrum infrared light. So whereas like the red light LED panels, they're like high doses of these particular wavelengths that are specifically absorbed by certain proteins for certain functions. So that you could think of, LED red light therapy panels, which is what we're going to first launch, are kind of just like a very targeted therapy, right? More isolated, to be honest, but still very beneficial. Then you have these heat lamps like SaunaSpace makes, or like just infrared saunas in general, which have a much more full spectrum of infrared, lower amounts of the really specific wavelengths that activate certain biological processes, but nonetheless, one is highly targeted and specific. The other is more sort of broad spectrum, which is also really beneficial in its own right because the sun is more broad spectrum. And so people can use these types of things. I recommend something like SaunaSpace or an infrared heat lamp for sweating, detoxing, and getting a big dose of infrared, or just going out in the sun. And I recommend, targeted red light therapy. And you could use something like a SaunaSpace or an infrared sauna, like as much as you want, like 1, 2, 3 times a day. I mean, really, it's like, I think people could do a lot of that. Especially if you're healthy. If you're not healthy, don't want to overdo because you might detox a ton, and so on and so forth. The heat shock protein activation might overwhelm your system. So maybe start slow, build up. Then the red light therapy is interesting. You could do, like, I'd say 1 to 3 sessions per day. If you have a full body panel, we'll have one that's basically like the length at least of the whole torso. And you can use that for, again, 1 to 3 sessions per day for up to 20 minutes would be a session, with the distance being, between just within about 10 inches of the skin, within even 6 to 8 inches of the skin. And that has also a very beneficial effect, but I wouldn't overdo that because it's a delicate system. And just like you can overload on blue, like if each color is sort of like a bucket, we have buckets for each color, you could also overload on red. So I wouldn't recommend that either, but wouldn't recommend blue light therapy based on what I know. I would definitely recommend red light therapy. The other thing that's cool about red light therapy is it's kind of, especially like a fire, like a bonfire. You can use this, and whereas with the sun, you have to be careful about getting too much violet, ultraviolet, blue light, and so on. If you're out too long, especially ultraviolet, you'll burn. With this, you can't really overdo it, and it's a lot of healing energy, and people would be around bonfires for thousands of years, and it's really beneficial. So I think this gives context to people about, and I appreciate the question a lot.
No, this is great. And, I'm sure maybe some of our listeners are like, I thought you guys were into mushrooms. You haven't talked about mushrooms one time, and I'll loop it in.
Please.
We had the largest Cordyceps militaris farm in the Americas. And so we were, if anyone has seen a cannabis farm, you've seen these crazy kind of purpley lights. And we did a lot of research on what light spectrum cordyceps need. And there's a study that showed that just blue light actually brought down the levels of cordycepin, one of the main functional compounds in cordyceps. And just adding red light drastically improved the cordycepin levels in cordyceps, one of the main compounds. And there's this other study that was just released that Cordyceps militaris, specifically cordycepin, that molecule that I was talking about, helps support our regulation, of our circadian rhythm. So it's funny that the red light in the growing process of cordyceps actually helps support our circadian rhythm. And another mushroom as well, lion's mane as well. There's some studies that show it helps support, regulating our circadian rhythm. And then reishi as well, obviously, to take at night to help us get to bed, have support our body's natural ability to have a smooth transition to a good night's rest, and to wake up early with the sun, get outside in the sun, take your cordyceps, take your lion's mane, and have a beautiful day. And so I'm certified yoga teacher, and, everything is connected. And one of the things that
yes, sir.
we did was these eye movement trainings, these exercises. A lot of people, when they think of yoga poses, they think of, moving your arms and your legs, but they don't think of moving even your ears, your nostrils, your tongue in your mouth, your eyes, your eyebrows. These are all, practices to help tune into our body. And so I'm curious if you do any eye exercises or if you've heard of it, if that's part of your daily practice.
So eye exercises are partially part of my daily practice. I don't do any very intentionally, like anything movements, although it's very interesting and I definitely would like to investigate that more. I'd say the things I do that maybe could most closely relate to eye exercises are I do a lot of meditation. And so I'm still, but one interesting thing about certain types of meditation is that if you're really deep, you can go into like REM states. So that's sort of like rapid eye movement, but that's not exactly a conscious exercise. So it doesn't necessarily count. Um, what I definitely do is a lot of sun gazing, which is a very, very significant eye exercise. So I'll basically look directly at the sun. The main time is when it's rising and setting. So, about 30 minutes before sunset and 30 minutes after sunrise on a clean horizon is pretty safe. Depending on where you are on Earth, it can be longer if it's the winter and the sun is rising more horizontally than vertically, because you're far north or far south off the equator. If you're close to the equator or in the tropics or it's summer wherever you are, then the sun rises more vertically up rather than over. And so as it goes up higher, there's less atmosphere, there's stronger ultraviolet faster, which means it can burn the eye, the retina effectively. So yeah, that's a really important practice because it's like an eye workout. It's not an active per se. It's more passive, but it is strengthening the basically conditioning the eyes essentially, and providing a really strong stimulus for the production of for example, cortisol. All of the things our circadian rhythm is, related to and controlling, like serotonin as well. So that's probably the main eye exercise I do on a regular basis. And I'm a bit ambitious. I may regret this one day. I'm not sure, but I experiment. And so I'll sun gaze closer to the middle of the day a lot. Like I'll look at the sun when it's high in the sky and squint, and you have to breathe really deeply. I'm not recommending anyone do this. In fact, I do not recommend anyone do this. But I'll do it occasionally. And it's very interesting. It's like a very spiritual practice. It's almost like, how can I say, contending with the power of the sun, like really synchronizing to it. And you breathe deeply. Again, buyer beware. I've heard stories of people who definitely hurt their eyes and got themselves blinded by doing this. So I'm ambitious and daring, like Ben Greenfield, people who do sometimes things that would be considered dumb just for the purposes of understanding what they might do. So yeah, that's about it as far as eye exercises go. My typical routine as far as like things I do right now, I'm trying to keep it simple because running a business, as you know, I've been in a place many times in the past few years where like I wake up and like I maybe, I'll do my normal routine. I'll watch the sunrise and basic stuff, but there's a lot of other stuff I'd neglect because I would just get straight into work all day. Like it wasn't a really healthy relationship with my business for a long period of time. So now I just try to keep it simple, wake up, meditation practice. If I want to work in yoga or work in journaling or something in this early morning hours, typically, especially when I'm not traveling like crazy and I'm able to get settled in. But even if I am traveling, I try to stick as closely as possible. I aim to wake up about an hour plus before sunrise. So like if the sun's rising around 6 a.m., which it is in San Diego, I'd try to be up, for example, around 5, 4:30, even 4. And this is a consistent theme among the most successful, highest performers is like many people and enlightened masters. They wake up at like 3 or 4 a.m. and they're meditating or they're training or whatever it is they want to be accomplishing. It's like those hours in my experience, each 1 hour in the early morning is worth like 3 hours of time later in the day. And even then it doesn't compare because the focus and the energy is so calm and clean. Many people have like this night owl syndrome where they experience the same thing late at night, which is also valid because the energy of the planet kind of calms down when it comes to night and people are going to sleep. But the issue is for a diurnal animal, who isn't an enlightened master who can basically live without sleep, which most of us aren't because we aren't living that lifestyle. We're in the world. We have all the normal stressors. We're not isolated, or we're not meditating 3 hours or 4 hours a day. For most people, I don't recommend staying up super late or trying to stay up all night. It's just not, I don't think, sustainable, and people can feel that. But I do recommend going to sleep super early, like 8 or 9, without any food, 3 to 4 hours before bed. And even then, the last meal being lighter, the heaviest food all being in the middle of the day. And then blocking blue light with raw optics, for example, sleep lenses, and then going to sleep. And so yeah, I'll do some meditation in the morning. I'll do I'll do some work. Actually, I've started more recently to just do work first thing in the morning, because I always feel most accomplished if I do that, like some important project or writing piece or anything that I'm pushing off, strategizing. 2 hours in the morning, it's like I feel like I've won the day by 9 a.m. and I'm stoked. I like to go out, and like just before we got on the call, actually, I was a little bit delayed with my work this morning, and I was just going for a run, jumping in the ocean. So I'll try to do something, whether it's surfing, running, walking, body weight, something physical, and then try to do some reading, and then basically from there begin. And that takes me up to lunch, practically early lunch, around 10:30, 11, 12 latest. And then that's my biggest meal of the day. That's what I'll eat after we get off the phone here. And then from there, it's like the day, phone calls, work, projects, and try to, again, like taper it off. And I think what I'm getting at with me sharing my routine is that, not only are the most successful people, it seems, very disciplined about their morning routine, which is something I'm just working on being better at every day, to be honest. I wouldn't consider myself a master of the daily routine and discipline, getting there though, but that's just a consistent thread among high achievers and stuff. Secondly, from a biological perspective, it really is, we're talking about circadian rhythms. Like, it really is good for the body to get into a rhythm. Like, I know, okay, I wake up and I have my tea or whatever it is that someone does. They have their meditation, their yoga, and you just can get in this great rhythm. And I think that's where people can start to experience like more flow states and more of that magic, and always, being open to the unexpected, and not worrying if everything's perfect or not, but just having a general rhythm. I think that that's something, from not having had a rhythm for basically 4 years, traveling all the time and exploring and meeting all these people, doing all this stuff. I'm like, whoa, that's important, as I've started to do more of it.
Is.
So
yeah. And Indigo, I know you were asking in the chat for, eye exercise practice. And I know, Matt, you just shared the sun gazing, which is great. But part of the practice, which I learned in the training, and bonus, if you could do this outside in the sun, to get that full spectrum of light, and other bonus, if you could do it by a waterfall, to get those negative ions. I used to be blessed to live by a waterfall, but not anymore. But just outside, first, when you first wake up, just to get, don't look at your phone, just go outside. And a lot of us have bad routines, right? So practice is, doesn't make perfect. It makes what you practice. And so if you go outside, and there's a pretty popular meditation practice where it's called body scanning, where you start at the top of your body, and you just, consciously scan and check in. If you're holding tension anywhere, you can just let go, all the way to your feet. And you can even do it, your body, the room you're in, the house, the property you're on, your town, your state, the country, the planet, and on, and do that kind of scanning as well. This takes that sort of concept, but with our joints, or any place on our body that we can move. So starting maybe with your eyebrows, of just moving maybe your left eyebrow, then your right, if you can individually move them up and down, squint them and bring them up. And then your eyes as well. So any direction that you can move your eyes, you can start with like a box pattern. And you can do this with your eyes open or closed. It doesn't really matter. But you can go kind of in a box pattern, in a cross pattern, so horizontal and up and down. And then also circles. So you can go, clockwise and counterclockwise, to kind of wake your eyes up, and this is great if you've been looking at a screen to, do these different movements with your eyes. A lot of times we're just straightforward all day, and we're looking at a screen at the same distance. So to give your eyes a little more movement, and to build that muscle, so to speak, And then you know, go down if you can move your ears. I can actually move my ears. Not a lot of people can, but you can wiggle your ears a little bit, flare your nostrils, and your tongue inside your mouth, in the interior of your teeth, and then, you know, on the outside of your teeth. And you just go down, and then you move your arms, you know, clockwise, your shoulders up and down, all the way to your fingers, all the way down to your toes. So I think that's a great practice. And at the end, once you do the full scan, especially if you do it in full sunlight, you just feel so good. And every part of your body, including the ones you don't really tune into, like moving your ears, your nostrils, or your eyes or eyebrows, you know, you forget you have these parts of your bodies a lot of times. So that for me is a great practice to just wake up, and it includes eyes, it includes biohacking with light. And if you could take your mushrooms before you do it or after, even better. And that for me is a great practice that is easy. You know, little kids love to do it. And it's, I don't know, I think it's a lot of fun.
That's super cool. That's actually really, really cool. And I find when I first got into this health space, there's so many people who are doing there's just so many practices, you know, like it could get overwhelming. It's like, oh my gosh, there's so much that I could do. And what I've come to for myself is just, you know, okay, what resonates with me the most? What do I want to be doing? And just picking something and sticking with it. You know, like for me, my morning meditations, I've been kind of leaning a lot into Dr. Joe Dispenza and his work. And so, you know, I'm going kind of all in on that, but maybe one time it'll be different. Maybe it'll be yoga. Maybe, you know, there's all these Taoist practices and there's all these other things, Tantra and eye exercises. So I just think for people, like what resonates with you, what fascinates you fascinates you, put it into that routine and just do it. Yeah. So I think that could be really beneficial probably for our brain too, and our eyes' ability to assimilate light. I would assume just at least working them, it clearly has some benefits. So cool.
Definitely. So we're just over an hour together, and, you know, definitely we have a group of curious individuals. So please use the chat box if you have any final questions before we wrap up. And Matt, I don't know if you have any, I know you could probably talk about this subject for forever. But are there any things that we missed that you're just dying to talk about that you think is important? Any practical, you know, takeaways that people can take home with them?
So I would say there are a lot of things people can do, but the basic ones are what we covered. So, you know, starting to realize and understand and learn that light has this really significant role on our body and on our spirit as well is really important. It's just something that's not known about and is going to continue to become more and more well known. And sort of the interesting derivation from this, in my experience, is, as I was alluding to earlier, the idea of the third eye is understanding that, you know, basically with light, we can begin to affect our own inner light, our body's internal light. And this is where, you know, Taoist practices, meditation practices, all these types of things, third eye practices, as well as many other things, can have a really big impact on our body's sort of inner light. And no matter how much we dial in our external light environment and circadian rhythms, if someone's, you know, affected with trauma or holding really negative belief systems or limiting beliefs, we can start to have really profound issues, no matter how great our health and our environment is. So this is sort of the evolution, and all of the things that I am talking about here today are part of what I call the light diet. So there's all these food diets, the paleo diet, this and that. And I just thought, you know what, like, let's change it a little bit. And just, so the light diet, and I'm astounded that I was able to get like the Instagram handle and the domain. But the light diet is sort of my best ability to summarize the modern science and the ancient wisdom in a way that people can start to simply apply to improve their health. And because I can't get through it all in one podcast episode, I made a course recently, a simple video course that people can get on rawoptics.com alongside with the screen and sleep lenses. And if someone gets both screen and sleep or any two pairs, the course is free with that. And so it's just really useful. There's a lot of details that people really seem to appreciate. And, you know, when I released it, a lot of people were reaching out to me saying, you know, I'm sort of skeptical of many of things I do sometimes. I'm like, ooh, is this going to be, are people going to like it? And people were saying, wow, like this is amazing. I've already been biohacking for years. There's so much I didn't know in here. It's simple, it's direct, but it has really valuable information for people. So basically, that's what I recommend people do if they want to go deeper and further. The simple takeaways, you know, watch the sunrise or get out and get morning sunlight, you know, whether if you can get it right when it comes over the horizon, great. If it's not for another hour, that's great too. But the earlier, the better for the maximal circadian effect. But just being awake earlier is really, really super important to be present and awake when the light is changing, and having some windows open at the very least so that you can get that stimulus. But again, getting outside and even looking at the sun is the best. Now, as I was saying earlier, to be able to wake up naturally without an alarm early in the morning, that is what requires us in the face of a modern world that sends us in the other direction, in the direction of circadian disruption. That's where a lot of discipline is required, which is basically, like I said, biggest meal in the middle of the day, typically speaking. If for dinner, it's our culture in the States, especially, to have huge meals later, and same in Spain and Italy. This is really disruptive because our body doesn't get into sleep mode. We're basically metabolizing and digesting all night long. We don't get into repair mode. So we're in our conscious waking hours, we're functioning at a fraction of our total capacity. And so eating lighter dinner and then attempting to not eat anything, you know, 3 to 4 hours before bed, going to sleep early, and then that's sort of the formula to wake up earlier naturally. And then from there, that's a pretty good start. Getting some sunbathing. If people are going to sunbathe, the middle of the day is the best time to do that, because it's when there's the most ultraviolet B to make vitamin D. So you can do a 10 or a 20-minute dose, maybe 5 to 10 minutes on each side of the body. But if someone is super pale, you know, again, this is all in the Light Diet course. I go very deeply through how people can start to improve their relationship with sun, all the things to know about dosing and starting with small amounts and building up, and the context for people with darker skin who can take more sun and need more sun for the same amount of vitamin D versus someone with lighter skin who needs less sun but also can't handle as much. So this is all context that people should know, but that's sort of the gist of it. Yeah.
That's awesome. I definitely want to take it. And the only blue light blocking glasses I have are the film, so I got to upgrade my glasses.
Oh man, we got to hook you up.
Yeah, I know. You got me super excited. It's such a duh. You know, when you explained it in the beginning, I mean, the sun really controls our life, and light is, we've been really messing it up for humans with our artificial lights, and it is such a obvious solution that is a lot of times free, or relatively cheap, given in relation to the benefits. But we have a great question from Indigo, another question, that she lives in the Pacific Northwest. It's cloudy. I almost moved there. I know how you feel. That's why I didn't move there, because I get affected by not having a lot of sunlight. But what is the difference between cloud coverage versus full sunlight? Do we get any light benefits even on a cloudy day? And just to add on to her question, just because I'm curious, I know you're not a doctor, but are there any solutions like I know we were talking about the happy lamp before, but kind of that mimic sunlight artificially?
Yeah, of course. So first of all, there is a big difference, because full spectrum, or I should say unfiltered sunlight, there's just a lot more heat you'll feel, and it's very therapeutic. And so it's hard to replace sunbathing in direct sunlight. It's very, very powerful and very, very important. However, never fear, because we don't need a ton of direct sunlight sunbathing. Like, for example, especially people with European skin, people with darker skin technically need more. because the melanin in the skin doesn't allow a significant portion to come through. So in the winter, people with darker skin are not able to make basically to utilize the light in the way that is necessary, is ideal. Now, again, there are caveats to this because in Inuit people, for example, they never had the adaptation of lighter skin, and yet they're living in basically Alaska. And so there are things that they've done, for example, like they only eat fish, basically whale blubber, things that are available there, mushrooms, potentially if they have them, seaweed, things that are super high in natural vitamin D. So specifically like fish, certain other things that you can get in those regions. So they can do things like this. But most people don't eat like this because it's not considered an appetizing diet like blubber and all these sort of seafood, raw seafood types of things. But so what I'm getting at is Indigo, I'm not sure your heritage, but if you have European ancestry, being in northerly places with lots of cloud cover, especially, probably not a huge deal. And you can get the sun that you need in the summer to sort of fill up your vitamin D stores, and then you're good throughout the winter if you're getting out a lot during the summer. The issue is that now most people, like when the summer does come around, are still inside just as much. Huge issue, huge mistake. In Norway and these places where they're a little more traditional, they're still living in the Western world, but they have this sort of thing where like they have so much darkness and such long winters. As soon as the sun comes around, like they're out, like they're fishing, hiking, everything, and they're doing it all. Because I love Norway. I go there a lot. My ancestors are from there. My friends, I have a bunch of friends there. So I just feel at home there in that, Nordic region. And people tell me I look like Scandinavian, so it's something that we need to adapt from this European culture over to the States. When the sun comes out, let's get the sun. So the good news, Indigo, is that when the winter comes around and there are cloudy days, there's still a huge benefit to light that's coming through the clouds. It's still sunlight. It's still full spectrum light. It is still stimulating the processes that we need in our body. So just get outside a lot. That's all. Just keep going outside in the winter. Like there's a study that was mentioned in the book, The Healing Sun, where he talks about how just people with seasonal affective disorder, it was like a group of about 30 people. Out of 30 people, it was like 29 of them, when they would walk for an hour a day, even on a cloudy day in the morning, their seasonal affective disorder symptoms were basically cured just from an hour walk, even under cloudy sky. So even if there's 30 or 50% less sun, less light, it's still hugely beneficial. So I hope that answers the question.
And I think this maybe answers your first question, Brian, to how to handle the summer heat when attempting to live outdoors. Try to stay in the shade, but the summer humidity makes me want to go outside, back inside where the AC is on. I think Matt just covered that question of, try your best to get as much as possible. And, especially in the summer and depending on your heritage. And obviously, if you want to supplement with vitamin D through your diet or in supplements, I think that will help. But
I wouldn't do vitamin D supplementation. Cholecalciferol has been shown to be really toxic, so I wouldn't do that one. But through diet could be really good, or through like mushrooms, I would say. Again, if you have a different perspective, please enlighten me. But
mushrooms, mushrooms can be a great source. And there's
mushrooms.
I've been seeing some products on the market, especially from Agaricus bisporus or, typical button mushrooms. There's a process where they flash it with light to increase the vitamin D amount by up to 40,000 times. And they can put this into a powder, and they're even supplementing foods, with this super vitamin D rich, button mushroom powder. And even in the grocery stores, some of them will even say on the packaging, like vitamin D enriched, and some mushrooms have this process more than others, but it is almost an industry standard for button mushrooms, so that can be a good source.
I think that's a good idea. One other thing about the heat is that I find that as I applied the light diet, the protocols that I now call the light diet, I just became a lot more resilient to the environment. And I'm not like a some kind of Viking or something where I can handle like the extreme cold through the winter. Like I'm not that resilient, although humans have this capacity. But on just a hot day, I can just be out in the heat. And because of my again mitochondrial haplotype, basically meaning where my ancestors come from and my mitochondria, the energy productions cells, or the factories, I should say, in the cells, release a lot more heat as an adaptation to stay warm in cold climates, and versus a equatorial or tropical mitochondria, which is designed to retain more heat. So it's interesting as a side note. Basically, the mitochondrial haplotypes, which is just types of mitochondria that are more removed from the equator in the tropics, typically are more loosely coupled, meaning that they basically release, they do more uncoupling, which is taking fat energy that's stored in our fat and releasing it as free heat when we're burning off our fat for fuel throughout the day, when we're not actively eating, when we're in a fasted state, or even when we do eat. More of that fuel is released as heat through these uncoupling proteins, as opposed to all being used to make ATP. So it was a really interesting thing to learn about that. One of the reasons we could argue that, for example, Kenyans win all the major marathons around the world is because their mitochondria, they have the most biological advantage because their mitochondria are the most tightly coupled. So for every unit of calories that they consume from food, they're releasing very little as heat and a lot, and they're turning it almost all into ATP. They're much more efficient. And by design, European and Northern mitochondrial haplotypes, like for example, even Inuits, are significantly less efficient. But because you don't have to worry about running away from a lion at the poles, you have to worry about freezing to death far away. So it's like we have an adaptation that could be considered disadvantageous for certain things like endurance sports, but significantly advantageous for things like not freezing to death in the winter. So it's really, really cool how adaptable humans are. And so the point is, apply these principles and you'll see that you start to just become more generally resilient to the environment. You can handle more cold, even if you have African or equatorial background. You can still be more resilient to the cold and more resilient to the heat regardless.
What about, and this is another question from Indigo, I love it, super curious. I love people who ask a bunch of questions, but just curious about the pineal gland connection to light.
All right, this is cool. So this is where I call on Dr. Joe Dispenza, because he is like this amazing guy, if people aren't familiar with him, who's basically focused on, he's a chiropractor by training, was his background, had a really severe injury in a triathlon that he was doing, was paralyzed, told he'd never walk again, had to do some surgery to try to save his life that could also risk his life and almost guarantee he'd be paralyzed. And basically having a background in yoga, said, you know what, I think I could probably heal this with my mind. And if I am able to do this, I'll dedicate the rest of my life to studying the mind-body connection. And this was when he was 25. He's almost 60 now. So like 30 years ago. And basically this is the 80s. And so he was able to, after a couple weeks or months being bedridden, he was focusing all his attention on healing his spine. And he said he would go through this exercise of just trying to get everything perfectly, because he's a chiropractor, so he could visualize all the vertebrae perfectly and trying to get everything to be perfect. And he would lose his focus and lose his attention. But he said finally, after weeks and weeks of trying to keep his focus through the whole process of restructuring his spine, he just got it one time without losing his focus at all. As soon as he got it, everything clicked and he was able to stand up and walk out of the hospital. And he's been totally healthy and functional ever since. So since then, he's been studying the mind-body connection. And he's become a big pioneer in the field of, bringing the Eastern ancient wisdom of yoga and all this stuff and meditation to a really Western world where people reject these things considered woo-woo. So he doesn't use that Eastern language. He uses Western science, the language of the way people think in our Western world. And so basically one of the things he studied a lot is the pineal gland. And I've gone to like 3 of his week-long events where we actively do meditations, but there's also like hours and hours of lectures every day about the science of how all this stuff works. And I'm really trying to refine it for myself. And so I can help, share the message ultimately. So basically, the pineal gland is like this sort of superconducting energy crystal. It's a really, really unique gland. It's super tiny, but basically, it has these crystals in it that basically they can sense energy from the external environment, energy that is beyond the visible range. So like basically frequencies and different energies. And this might start to sound kind of woo woo, but these are things that have actually been can be measured and can be actually experienced by people. So the pineal gland is essentially a sensor for not just light, but for energy beyond light. That's probably the best way to put it. And there are people who focus, in meditations, just their attention on their pineal gland and these energy centers in our head, basically above our head and our pineal gland. And they're able to not just visualize, but see a bright amount of light. And in the Bible, there's a verse that Matthew wrote that says they sat in darkness and saw great light. And so as these, pieces come together of the ancient wisdom and the modern science, it's starting to become more and more clear that there is this sort of inner light that is, some might call it our soul, our spirit, and so on. But the pineal gland is intimately related to this inner light as sort of a receptor transducer organ, I guess. So it's really fast. It's more a gland in the organ of the brain. So that's sort of like, I'd say, a simple summary of how the pineal gland is related to light, but it's arguably more spiritual energy, and not just spiritual, but actual energy and vibration that it's related to, and less like light in the way we think about traditional visible and even non-visible light. So it's my best shot at that one.
And even more simply, I mean, it produces melatonin, right? I mean,
this is
and which is regulated by light and darkness. And, so if we have a bunch of blue light at night, we're disrupting the production of melatonin. And simply put, we're fucking up our pineal glands function, right? Our normal.
It's a good point. It's funny is I totally didn't even think about that. I was approaching this from like a purely spiritual attempt.
Absolutely.
But you know what? I'm glad you bring that up, because Alex, guys, is perfectly on point with this. It is true. It's like, for me, it's like such a ingrained knowledge that I sometimes don't even think about it. And when someone calls it the third eye, I don't think pineal gland, I think third eye, even though they're considered the same. But yeah, like literally the light stimulus that's hitting our front eyes in the middle of, or in the morning, the middle of the day, or the absence at night, that stimulus is affecting this part of the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is the sort of the master regulator of the autonomic nervous system, of all these autonomic or vegetative functions that occur below our consciousness, so subconscious. And these parts of the brain are all having crosstalk and also speaking with the pineal gland. And so, yes, when we have the light stimulus, that we are secreting more serotonin. When we have darkness, lack of light, the pineal gland exactly is secreting a ton of melatonin. And there are certain techniques that Dr. Dispenza teaches that you can use with breathing to sort of, just by doing deep belly breathing throughout the day, we circulate our body's cerebrospinal fluid through the spine. But certain breathing techniques you can do that people have done for thousands of years to actually compress the pineal gland and cause it to more quickly produce things like DMT, dimethyltryptamine, and all these other amazing chemicals that the melatonin, or I should say that the pineal gland makes, that are derivatives of melatonin, like namely dimethyltryptamine, the hallucinogen, but there are a lot of others, those related to bioluminescence in algae, which is this is a derivative of melatonin. The chemicals responsible for hibernation are derivatives of melatonin. The chemicals responsible for, those are some of the main ones. Really, really interesting stuff. So it has a very big relationship to light. Awesome. I'll add one other thing. There's a Bible verse actually that says, not that everyone here would be inclined to take wisdom from the Bible, but I personally, I wouldn't call myself Christian per se, but being very spiritual and seeing, I believe Jesus was sort of a enlightened master, just like the yogis of the East, the great yogis of the East. And therefore, many of the things he shared or all of the things he shared were really truth in certain respects. And, there's different interpretations and people get very political about this stuff. But one thing that Jesus said is that if thine eye be single, then thy whole body will be full of light. And so we have these two eyes in the front, but we also have the singular eye, the pineal gland. And if we really, I think what that verse is saying, and the interpretation of people much wiser than myself, is that if we focus on that singular eye, the pineal gland or the third eye, then we're able more effectively to become a channel for light in ways that I don't fully understand. It's not my expertise, but it's something that's fascinating for me. And I think for you too.
Kind of switching gears
Yeah.
completely right now. Brian asked about mouth taping, and this is maybe related to light and, but about, asking, is there another solution to help? I'm kind of paraphrasing here.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Breathe through the nose. And it's funny, I was just having dinner. I was in Oregon the other week, and my friend during dinner was like, do you practice nostril breathing? And I was like, I've never, and it was an interesting question. And he was like, yeah, I've been trying to practice because, his body, I guess, wants to breathe through his mouth. And so he has to be conscious of breathing through his nose. And I guess maybe my upbringing or the way my body is biologically, I've never had that issue, and I just automatically breathe through my nose. But maybe it is an issue, and I don't know if you could speak to this, Matt, of and maybe if this has anything to do with light.
For sure, 100% it does. As does all. I mean, and there's nothing that has to do with life that doesn't have to do with light. So it's sort of a loaded answer. But basically, I can say from my childhood, part of the health issues I had, all the allergies and the systemic inflammation, my nasal passages were clogged, like inflamed, not just with mucus, but just inflamed for years. I mean, years, where my only option was to breathe through my mouth. And the evidence is very clear. I mean, across the board, basic Google search, people can see this. Not that everything that Google says is correct. I should just correct myself about that. But let's just be honest here. But the evidence shows that it puts us into a much more parasympathetic, calm state when we're breathing through our nose, as we're supposed to be. And breathing through our mouth is more stressful. And it's only really like an adjunct, additional method of getting breath in, which is a smart evolutionary invention to have two ways to get oxygen in case of emergency. But this is like, a friend of mine who's a yogi, basically almost like a monk, who's been practicing in the ancient traditions of Kriya Yoga and under Yogananda and this lineage. He's also very fit and healthy and Ayurvedic doctor. And one of the things he talks about a lot is when you do exercise, he tells me, try to get to at least 50% of your maximum capacity of output with just nostril breathing. So like when I run, when I surf, I'm trying to just stick with nostril breathing because it's sort of training your body in ways I don't fully understand. So I would say for mouth taping, I don't need to mouth tape because I am becoming more and more of a natural nostril breather. But as we apply the light diet, we heal our circadian rhythms, we get more sunlight, all these things we're doing, plus eating nutrient dense foods like mushrooms, and all the things we can do are lowering inflammation in our body and helping to re-regulate all the systems, including reducing inflammation here, which so many people have. So then we can basically naturally go back to that pattern of nasal breathing. That's, I'd say, a simple way to put it.
Great. Awesome. So if anyone has any other questions, feel free to add them. But if not, we're going to wrap up. And again, this is recorded. We will have a link so you can watch it again. We'll send an email out to everyone with links to the books that he was talking about. With anything else you want to add, Matt, after this, we can have a full summary after this, and we'll also post it on our YouTube so you can watch it again. Go back to parts that maybe you were zoning out or wanted to listen to again. And do you want to talk about your website again, where people can check out your glasses and your course?
Yeah, thank you. So people can go to rawoptics.com. That's R-A, raw, like the Egyptian sun god, no W, rawoptics.com. And that's where people can get screen lenses, sleep lenses, soon to be raw red light therapy. And the light diet course is available right now. So that's all really good stuff people can do. And we'll set up, I think, if we don't already have it, a discount code so that people can get a discount. Probably it'll be Mushroom Revival. If we might already have that set up, but I don't know if you guys do that, but I think it's a good idea. So yeah, let's do it. So then people can do that. And then on Instagram, people can find me at The Light Diet, on Twitter at The Light Diet. I'm starting to use Twitter a little more. And also the company is raw_optics on Instagram. So we have great content there as well. So check it out, follow, and thanks for tuning in and thanks for watching.
Thanks, everyone. And thanks, Matt, for giving your light wisdom.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for creating the space.
Yeah, get out in the sun, everyone, and block that blue light at night. Get to bed.
Yeah.
Cool. Much love, everyone. Thanks.